The apartment goes silent around 11 at night. The kind of silence that used to feel hollow but now feels like a shield. You sit down at a folding table, laptop open, that same hairline crack still running through the corner of the screen. And you pull up a spreadsheet you have kept hidden for 3 years, one that not a single other person has ever laid eyes on. Your phone lights up, your cousin asking if you can float him $50 until Friday. You say yes because that is the role you have always played for them. What they have no idea about is that the account sitting behind that $50 holds 6 figures, built one quiet transfer at a time, and that in exactly 11 minutes, a wire is set to go through that could either double your position or erase 4 months of effort in one swing. You close the message. You watch the numbers instead. This is the piece nobody ever witnesses. Not the wins, not the losses, just the waiting, the quiet, the discipline required to look like absolutely nothing is happening, while everything, all at once, is happening. 2 years back, you were living exactly where they still assume you are, check to check. A job that covered survival but left nothing over for a future. You remember the exact night that changed. It didn't arrive as some sudden windfall. It arrived as a decision. You had $400 left after rent, and rather than blowing it on something that would feel good for a weekend, you dropped it into an account you never mentioned to anyone. No celebration, no post about it. You simply watched and kept watching. And slowly, that $400 stopped being $400 and became something else entirely. You figure out early that silence isn't something that just happens to you. It's a strategy you choose. The instant people know what you have, they start deciding what you owe them. A cousin who needs 50 becomes a cousin who needs 500. A friend's business pitch turns into a loan request wearing the costume of a partnership. You watched this play out with someone else once, a guy from your old job who won some money and couldn't help telling the whole office. Within a year, he was back to zero, not because the money vanished on its own, but because he let everyone else spend it through him. So you build differently. You build in the dark. Your first real risk is small, almost laughably small compared to what's coming later. $3,000 into a position you'd spent 6 weeks researching. Numbers that only make sense once you understand something almost nobody around you bothers to learn. Your hands stay steady when you place the trade, but your stomach does not. You go to work the next day, smile at coworkers asking how your weekend went, and answer, "Fine, nothing much," while your entire nervous system is somewhere else completely. It moves against you first, dropping 8% over 2 days. You tell no one. You don't let your panic show in front of a single person. You go home. Sit with the numbers alone and make the call alone. Hold. 3 weeks later, it's up 31%. You sell half and you say nothing about it. The next morning, you clock in like every other ordinary day. This becomes the pattern. Win quietly, lose quietly. Never let your expression tell a story that contradicts your bank balance. By month 8, you're no longer relying on luck, you have a system. You read filings most people skip entirely. You learn to study a company's debt structure the same way other people study a restaurant menu. You learn which numbers can lie and which ones simply cannot, no matter how convincing the spokesperson sounds on television. You start to grasp that the world runs on people who don't want to put in this kind of work, and the ones who do it silently are the ones who actually come out ahead. Your family still believes you're barely getting by. Your friends still plan trips assuming you'll have to bow out over money. You let them keep believing it, not out of embarrassment, but as protection. You've learned that being visible is a tax you can't afford to pay yet. Around month 11, there's a night you nearly break your own rule. You're at a family dinner and your uncle is bragging about his retirement account, proud of a 6% year. Something in you wants to tell him what your year actually looked like. You catch yourself. Instead, you nod and ask him a question about his fund rather than answer the one building in your own chest. Walking to your car later, you realize that moment was a test. Not one that anyone else set up, but one you set for yourself. And you passed it. The first time real money shows up in the picture, it doesn't feel anything like the movies. No confetti falls. You're sitting on the same secondhand couch in the same apartment, staring at a number larger than what your parents earned combined over 3 years. And the only thing you feel is a strange, heavy stillness. Not joy, not relief. Something closer to responsibility. You understand in that moment that money at this scale isn't a reward, it's an entirely new rulebook. You start reading up on structures you never needed before. Entities, holding companies, the difference between owning something under your own name versus owning it in a way that shields it from your own future mistakes, from lawsuits, from people who might one day decide they deserve a slice of what you built simply because they knew you before you built it. You hire your first advisor, not off a recommendation, but off your own research, a woman who has quietly managed money for people whose names you'd recognize if she ever said them out loud, which she never does. You realize discretion isn't just a personal value anymore, it's the entry fee for the room you're now walking into. Every step forward drags a smaller, sharper decision behind it. There's the month you have to choose between reinvesting almost everything into an opportunity that could triple your position or protecting what you've already built. The old version of you, the paycheck-to-paycheck version, would have played it safe purely out of fear. The version of you now sits with the numbers for 4 straight days, running scenarios, stress testing the worst-case outcome, calculating exactly how much you could afford to lose before it would actually hurt. And only then do you act. You're no longer gambling, you're executing. You start noticing a shift in yourself that has nothing to do with the money and everything to do with who you are becoming. You walk into rooms differently, not louder, quieter. You ask fewer questions out loud because you already know most of the answers, and you save your real curiosity for the people who can actually teach you something new. You stop needing people to be impressed, because the second someone is impressed, they start asking questions. And the second they start asking, the silence you've spent years building begins to crack. There's a version of this life that tempts you constantly, the version where you finally tell somebody, where you finally let your parents stop worrying, where you finally buy something visible enough that the world starts treating you differently. You think about it more than you'd ever admit out loud, but every time you get close to breaking the silence, you remember the guy from your old job, the one who told everyone, the one who's back at zero now, surrounded only by people who show up when there's something to take. So you keep building in the dark, and eventually the dark stops feeling like hiding and starts feeling like protection. By the time you cross a number you once assumed was impossible, something in your body finally catches up to what your mind understood months earlier. This isn't going away. You're no longer one bad month from sliding back into your old life. There's a cushion now, then a wall, then something that starts to resemble a fortress. And you didn't build any of it in public. You built it in silence, transfer by transfer, decision by decision, refusal by refusal. Every time you said no to spending, no to bragging, no to needing anyone to actually see you. The compounding isn't only happening in your accounts, it's happening inside you. Every quiet win teaches you patience. Every quiet loss teaches you discipline. Every temptation to reveal it, and every time you resist that temptation, teaches you control. You start realizing the wealth itself was never really the point. The person you had to become in order to build it quietly, that's the real asset. The money is just the proof of it. Nearly 2 years in, there's a moment when your cousin calls again. The same one who once needed $50. This time it's a bigger number, framed as an emergency. You feel the old instinct rise up, the guilt, the urge to prove you're still the same generous, accessible person you always were. But you've learned something the old version of you hadn't figured out yet. Help given from silence is a different thing entirely from help given as a performance. So you help quietly, without an explanation, without turning it into a story either of you will ever bring up again. Then you hang up the phone and go back to the numbers, because the numbers don't care how generous you were 5 minutes ago. They only care what you do next. For the first time, you start to understand hierarchy. Not the hierarchy of money, but the hierarchy of information. Some people only know what's already public. Some people know what's coming before it happens. And some people quietly build positions based on patterns almost nobody else is patient enough to sit still and notice. You realize you've moved, slowly, invisibly, from the first group all the way into the third, and nobody around you has any idea it happened because you never let them see the process, only the stillness on the surface. The stress doesn't fade as the numbers climb. If anything, it sharpens. There's more to lose now, heavier decisions, more nights spent with the cracked laptop screen glowing, feeling the full weight of what one wrong move could unravel. But you also notice you don't flinch the way you used to. You've built a nervous system capable of holding pressure without letting it leak onto your face, onto your family, onto anyone who still believes you're exactly where you started out. Some nights you think about what would happen if you finally told the truth. Not out of pride, but out of pure curiosity. Would they be happy for you? Or would they start seeing you differently, calculating differently, needing differently? You don't know the answer, and you've decided you're not ready to find out. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Because the silence isn't only protecting your money anymore, it's protecting the relationships you still want to keep simple. There's a strange kind of loneliness built into this version of success, one nobody warns you about. You can't fully celebrate with people who don't know what they'd be celebrating. You can't fully explain your stress to people who still think your biggest problem is scraping together rent. You carry both the weight and the silence alone, and some nights that feels heavier than any market swing ever could. But then you glance at the account, the one that started with $400 and a decision nobody else witnessed, and you remember exactly why you chose this path. Not attention, not applause. Freedom that no one can take from you because no one even knows how large it's become. You're quietly constructing an entire second life, invisible brick by invisible brick, hidden behind the version of you that everyone around you still believes they fully know. And tonight, sitting there with the laptop glowing, the earlier wire finally clearing, the number in front of you higher than it has ever been before, you can't help but sit with a question that's been lingering quietly at the back of your mind for months now. If you built something massive, something real, something powerful, and never told a single soul the truth of it, would it still feel like winning? Or would the silence itself eventually turn into the most expensive price you ever paid?